So my name's Tim Hart. I'm Development Director here at Oxentia, and I lead a lot of our programs, particularly in Latin America. This all started back in about 2019 when I was in Colombia, in Bogota, delivering some commercialization training for one of the government agencies. And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, well, we'd like some more of this IP training that you're offering, but focused more on a particular challenge that we have, which is around trying to raise awareness about how we have rights and how we share intellectual property with the biological resources in Colombia. And of course, they were very quick to remind me that Colombia is the second most biodiverse place on Earth. And as part of its economic strategy, it's looking to catalyse and develop a world-leading bioeconomy. So this was very important to them from an economic perspective, but also from an environmental and ethical perspective to try and iron out these issues of, well, who owns the biological resources in Colombia, who has rights to them, and who benefits from exploitation of those rights. We became engaged with one of the UK government's flagship programmes. It's part of the GCRF programme, the Global Research Challenges Fund. This is part of the UK government's International Innovation Strategy. And this was a programme called GROW. It was a collaboration between the UK and Colombia scientists to explore and better manage and understand the biological resources in Colombia and their more effective, responsible management and exploitation in the future. So this programme asked us to consider a workshop to try and increase awareness and understanding of the exploitation of rights of biological resources in that country, which is an incredibly complicated country at the best of times, with huge potential, but complicated by the fact that, for example, some of the enormous areas in the country had not been accessed for the last 60, 70 years because of war within the country. So this is an opportunity for them to explore new areas and lead the way in responsible management of biological resource in the country. This wasn't simply a case of us getting together a group of Colombians across the value chain in using biological resource and explaining to them what patents were. This was far more complicated. And the first thing we realized is that actually this value chain is extremely diverse. On the one hand, it goes from international companies who eventually exploit and utilize the biological resources. These could be ingredients for the food industry, for the cosmetics industry. The biological resources are even utilized within tourism. As you can imagine, people want to see these incredibly diverse biological resources. But also in the pharmaceutical industry, there are natural products which could be used in new therapies for diseases. So at one end of the spectrum, we have industry, which is international. And then we move down to the academic sector who are studying these biological resources, both within Colombia and nationally, but also internationally. Then we have government agencies whose job it is to ensure that whatever state-owned biological resources there are, that they are being exploited in the right way and that the local people are being protected. And then right down at the other end, we have indigenous communities. And these are fascinating. This is an extremely diverse value chain and very different stakeholder groups with different perspectives on what should and should not happen and how aligned they are in their expectations of this process. So the first job we had was to understand these different groups and engage with them. The idea of the workshop was to bring them together and to find out what their challenges are, what their perspectives are, and what they can expect from each other in this process, and the outcomes were fascinating. Not only fascinating in order to try and help improve access of biological resources and benefit sharing of those resources in country, but actually what happened was it made us start thinking about the very way in which we do knowledge exchange and turning it on its head as a concept. And for us, that was an unexpected outcome of the project. One of the first findings was that, in fact, the industrial sector has a different perspective on the value of biological resources than perhaps some of the other stakeholder groups, or in fact we thought. For a lot of the industrial sector, particularly the pharmaceutical sector, natural products was an area that they were very interested in, and bioprospecting, but it's a very complicated area for them to manage. And there are other tools within their drug discovery strategies that they can use apart from rummaging around in the natural environment for new cures for cancer. So one has to understand that the demand for natural products and the potential of natural products as perceived by industry will change over time. And at the moment, it is not as perhaps high as some of the other stakeholder groups believe, perhaps the academic groups, the government groups, and also the indigenous communities. So aligning the expectation in where the value is was quite an important outcome, and I don't think the other stakeholders groups appreciated that perhaps the value wasn't as high as they thought. The most interesting outcome is that access and benefit sharing relies on the fact that we identify a knowledge asset which will be owned by somebody, and that asset can be utilized and exploited and commercialized in exchange for some form of monetary return. This is how we understand technology transfer. We take a knowledge asset and there is some economic value that could be derived from that, and that usually comes back in the form of licensing fees, royalties, milestone payments, however we dress it up. But it normally comes back in the form of an economic monetary return. It's quite a simple process. When we spoke to the indigenous communities, and the specific community that we had the privilege to engage with was the Arahakos community. And they told us something very interesting. This is a community that lives in the rural environments, has a relatively basic existence, perhaps as we would perceive them, and one would imagine that some economic uplift and monetary return would be something that they would be very interested in. That wasn't the case at all. They specifically don't want monetary return in exchange for access and exploitation by a third party of their biological resource. What they want is knowledge back. And for us, this is fascinating. Why no money? Why don't you want dollars back? And they said, because money depreciates and degrades over generations, whereas knowledge doesn't. And they live in an environment where knowledge is passed down from generation to generation. And that has far more lasting impact than monetary exchange. And it caused us to reflect on perhaps how we have been doing knowledge exchange in the past, and how perhaps we should be doing it differently, or think about the value adds that we can do more of in the future. A lot of it comes down to stakeholder engagement. A lot of it comes down to, instead of default looking to prioritize some transactional activity between a knowledge asset and a knowledge acquirer and an exploitation partner, but more about understanding what those two parties could do and benefit from each other, as not only they exchange knowledge, but also they share knowledge too. we're going to be sharing some insights with you from individuals from those different stakeholder groups so you can hear their perspectives too and how they contributed to the outcomes that we've had from this workshop, and some very interesting perspectives on perhaps knowledge exchange for the future.